The doorbell rang at exactly 6:45 on a Saturday morning, still groggy and in pajamas. I shuffled the door and opened it to see Margaret Sterling standing firmly on my porch. She was dressed in a crisp pantsuit, clutching a clipboard like a weapon, her eyes fixed on my old 2012 Honda Civic parked on the curb. "You'll need to move that car right away," she declared, her voice sharp enough to cut through stone. I blinked at her, barely processing. "Sorry, what?" She tapped her clipboard with exaggerated impatience. "I have a guest coming this afternoon for my garden party, and they'll require that exact space. Kindly move your vehicle now." I looked from her to the curb. "That's public parking, Margaret. Anyone can park there." Her face darkened several shades as she stepped closer, her tone dripping with disdain. "Listen here. People like me work hard to maintain the reputation of this community. My events boost our property values. The least you could do is show a little respect to your superiors." That was the moment I realized she had woken up the wrong neighbor at dawn. "My name is David Chun. I'm 38, a software engineer, and generally the type of guy who avoids drama. 3 years ago, I moved into Pine Ridge Estates because it looked peaceful and well-managed. What I hadn't realized was that Margaret Sterling, the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, ruled the neighborhood like it was her empire. Margaret, 52, worked in real estate and had been HOA president for 7 years. Her oversized McMansion 2 doors down was always decorated for show. The community newsletter praised her as a visionary leader committed to excellence, which really translated to, she enjoyed imposing petty rules and bossing everyone around. Every month she threw large, noisy gatherings where her guests parked wherever they pleased. But heaven forbid someone else's car ended up in front of her house. That morning's confrontation was just the start. When I didn't move my car, she began leaving notes on my windshield. "Your vehicle disrupts the aesthetic harmony of our neighborhood. Please consider the image of our community." Then came bogus HOA citations. She accused me of excessive vehicle visibility and aesthetic noncompliance because she didn't like the shade of gray of my car. Later, she tried claiming my car was abandoned property, since I mostly work from home and didn't drive it every day. Things escalated further during her spring gala. She lined the entire street with homemade, reserved signs, even blocking my driveway. When I tore down the sign in front of my own property, she actually called the police, insisting I had stolen her belongings. The responding officer had to explain, barely keeping a straight face, that public parking spaces couldn't be reserved with cardboard signs. But Margaret wasn't done. She organized an emergency HOA meeting, proposing a new rule that would let the board, essentially just her, designate temporary reserve zones for special events. For once, half the neighborhood turned out, fed up with her antics, and I realized I wasn't the only one she had been targeting. Her downfall came soon after. One afternoon, while I was at a doctor's appointment, she hired a towing company to haul away my Civic. She claimed it had been left untouched for over 72 hours, which was an outright lie. I had security footage showing me driving the day before. The tow truck driver let slip that Margaret had paid him cash under the table and promised him exclusive towing rights if he helped her. Unfortunately for her, our neighbor James Morrison, a retired lawyer, caught the entire scene on video. James had already been documenting her behavior. He discovered that Margaret had been secretly running a side business, charging guests to attend her so-called networking events at her house. That violated both HOA rules and city zoning laws. In reality, she wasn't hosting garden parties. She was operating an unlicensed event venue in the middle of a residential neighborhood. When I finally retrieved my car from the impound lot, $300 poorer and still furious, James came by with a folder in his hand. "We can't let this go on," he told me, calm but firm. "She's been pulling stunts like this for years, treating the HOA like her own private army." That was the start of our alliance. Together, we began digging into Margaret's record. What we uncovered was worse than either of us expected. She had been siphoning off HOA funds for years, disguising her expenses as community improvement projects. Payments had been funneled to her cousin's landscaping company for jobs that were never completed. Kickbacks from preferred vendors were quietly slipping into her own pockets. James, after reviewing the records, estimated she had diverted more than $40,000 over just 3 years. But financial misconduct wasn't her only weapon. Margaret had been secretly recording homeowners, during meetings, casual conversations, even phone calls, and keeping private files on them. She used these recordings to blackmail anyone who dared oppose her. She'd force buyers to hand over personal information during the approval process and never discarded it. Divorce proceedings, bankruptcies, health conditions. She hoarded it all and weaponized it. Maria Gonzalez came forward with one of the most chilling stories. Margaret had told her that unless she stopped questioning the bogus citations, she'd report her to immigration. Maria, born and raised in Texas, was a U.S. citizen, but that didn't matter. Margaret relied on fear, not truth. Another neighbor revealed Margaret threatened to call Child Protective Services because his kids played outside after 5 p.m., something she labeled a safety hazard. Armed with evidence, James and I presented everything to the HOA board. Shock rippled through them, though many admitted they weren't surprised. They ordered an emergency audit and scheduled a special election. Margaret, of course, tried to dismiss it all as a smear campaign. But the audit revealed even more than we had collected. Forged signatures, threatening letters sent on official HOA stationery, bogus fines she'd pocketed instead of recording. The emergency meeting at the community center was overflowing. Residents packed the room, many carrying their own stacks of papers. Margaret swept in wearing her sharpest suit and clutching a binder, ready to defend herself. She launched into a speech about how she was the only one protecting the neighborhood from decline and accused me of stirring rebellion out of jealousy. Her performance didn't last long. One by one, neighbors stood and shared their experiences. The elderly woman fined hundreds for owning a garden hose that didn't match her siding. The young family nearly evicted because their children's bikes were visible. The veteran harassed over his American flag, which Margaret claimed was too large. The stories kept coming, and Margaret's polished defense began to crumble. The final blow came when James unveiled the results of the financial audit. Even her closest allies on the board turned on her, unable to deny the theft and deception. The vote to remove her was unanimous. Margaret was stripped of her title on the spot and barred from ever holding HOA office again. But the reckoning didn't end there. The files were passed to the district attorney, and soon Margaret was indicted on charges of fraud, forgery, embezzlement, and abuse of authority. Her trial moved quickly. The evidence was overwhelming. She attempted to negotiate a plea deal, but the prosecutor, who, as fate would have it, lived in a nearby community Margaret had once tried to influence, refused to cut her any slack. The judge was unrelenting. He called her actions a grotesque misuse of power and condemned her for exploiting her neighbors, particularly the elderly, veterans, and families she had bullied. His ruling was blunt. 3 years in prison, no parole for the first 18 months, and restitution of $72,000. That included every penny she had siphoned off plus all the unlawful fines she had pocketed. On top of that, her real estate license was revoked, and she was permanently barred from HOA involvement anywhere in the state. I'll never forget her face when the sentence was read. First red, then pale, then gray. For the first time in years, she had no retort, no speech, no smug remark. As the bailiff stepped forward with handcuffs, she finally cracked, sobbing that it was all a mistake, that she was indispensable, that the neighborhood couldn't survive without her. The courtroom remained still, her pleas echoing unanswered as she was led away.